right. Hello, hello. My name is Anthony Campolo. I'm here to talk to you about RedwoodJS and AWS AppSync. These are both really cool projects built around GraphQL. Since this is a GraphQL meetup, I'm kind of assuming that we have some basic GraphQL knowledge here, but I'm not going to assume any knowledge of Redwood or AWS. What I want to do is build out a simple little hello world application first with Redwood and then with AppSync to kind of show you what each of them are. And then we're going to look at a community members project that actually integrated the two of them together. So hopefully you should get an idea of what each of them are, what they're for, and then if you actually did want to integrate them together, how you would go about doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is the RedwoodJS homepage. We say that RedwoodJS is bringing Fullstack to the Jamstack. And what we mean by that is it's a single project that is contained in a mono repo. So this is a lot of stuff right here in this picture, but the only thing you really need to worry about is what's happening here on the left. You have your front end, which is a bit like a Create React app or like a Gatsby or a Next project. It has components, it has forms, it has your styling, it's your whole kind of front end. But then your back end is where you have your GraphQL schema and you have your database as well. So we'll get into that a little bit once we build out the project, but that's just kind of a little idea of like what the architecture is. What I really like about Redwood though is that you can kind of just start building out an application, and to me that's kind of the best way to start wrapping your mind around it. So what I'm going to do is just fire up a brand new Redwood application. So what we're doing right now is we're using Yarn, and we are creating a project called GraphQL Denver. So it's Yarn create, then Redwood-app, that's to create your Redwood app. This generates a boilerplate RedwoodJS project. And RedwoodJS is a combination of a lot of different technologies. If you've ever used something like Ruby on Rails, the idea is kind of similar. That's a bunch of different libraries kind of glommed together into one big integrated thing that makes it easier to work with all of them. And React is your front end, and GraphQL is how your front end speaks to your back end. So this is why I'm really excited to talk about Redwood at a GraphQL talk, because I think that RedwoodJS to me is a really great example of how to take advantage of the potential of GraphQL. Because when we think about GraphQL, one of the things that makes it really nice is that it allows your front end devs to have a very easy way to speak to the back end to get the data they need, instead of having to do this whole dance around creating REST endpoints and constantly creating new endpoints to get the exact data that your front end needs. You can instead just have a consistent way for the front end and the back end to speak to each other. And the problem though is that actually creating that GraphQL API is like a huge struggle, and it takes like a ton of time and a ton of startup effort. So frameworks like Redwood and services like AWS AppSync are really nice for giving you that ability to essentially have all that stuff baked in, so you can just like hit the ground running and have a whole project with GraphQL that's going to work very well and be integrated very simply. So while that's kind of building out, the other thing that we're going to be talking about is going to be AWS AppSync. And AWS AppSync is a managed service for GraphQL APIs. If you've ever used something like API Gateway, it's a way to kind of like stitch together a lot of your services so that they can talk to each other, and like it's the same kind of idea. Like all these things, the thing that makes GraphQL is nice is that it's like a middle layer between your front end and your back end. So you'll frequently hear people ask like, is GraphQL for like front end devs or for back end devs? And like the answer is yes, it's for both. That's really kind of the idea here with GraphQL. So now that we got our project generated here, we have some information to how to join the community, how to get some help and all that. And what we're going to do then is we're going to cd into our project, and then we're going to open our project, and we're also going to then start our development server. Let's do that. And so all the commands are going to start with yarn rw for yarn redwood. And then dev is for your development server. Your development server will kick off on localhost 8910. And that's what we'll be able to see our kind of boilerplate Redwood application. And it's going to just say, hello, this is Redwood. And it gives you a little bit of information about how to create routes. And we don't need to worry too much about how to do all that. So we're going to leave that running over there. And then let's just get all this set up. Get that there, and we'll get this over here. Cool. All right, and now what we're going to do is we're going to generate some pages. Redwood comes with a lot of really nice CLI commands out of the box. It uses yargs, and it's a great way to generate any sort of part of your Redwood project. So right now we're going to do yarn redwood generate. We're going to generate a page, and it is going to be called home. So it's going to be our home page. And then the path is going to be /. And then over here, this is going to update once it generates the page. And it's just going to give us a basic little boilerplate saying home page and all that. So that's pretty cool. And then we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to generate an about page. So now we're going to go to / about, and we see the same thing about. And if you see here, we search about, you see where the word about was inserted versus home, where we had home inserted. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a layout. And what the layout is going to do is the layout is going to wrap our pages. So if we look at our project here, this is our home page that we're looking at over here. So if we wanted to change that to GraphQL Denver and save, then we'll see the change reflected over there on the right. And make sure we get that capital L there. And so that's our home page, and then our about page is the same sort of deal. But in our layouts, this is how we're going to actually be able to wrap both of our pages. We're going to take this blog layout here. And once we create this layout, we're going to bring it in to our home page by importing the blog layout and then wrapping our content with that blog layout. We go to the home page over here. And now if we go to about, it'll take us to our about page. And we're not going to see the same layout because we haven't imported that layout into our about page. So we'll do the same thing here on our about page. And then now we can switch between our home page and our about page. So that's pretty cool. That's kind of what you would get from something like a Gatsby or a Next, like a front-end framework that handles your pages and maps your components to your pages and gives you layouts and all that stuff. So that's great. But there's a lot more going on here with Redwood, which is what we're going to get into now with Prisma. Now, Prisma is what's called a next generation ORM. What this means is they don't want to call themselves an ORM because ORM is a dirty word, but it's basically an ORM. ORM is something that maps your objects to your relations, relations being SQL. So all this is this is letting you not have to write SQL. So we're creating a post model, and it's going to have an ID, title, a body, and it created that. Once we've done that, we can create a migration, and the migration is what's going to generate our SQL, and then we're going to be able to apply those SQL commands to our database. And once we do that, then we can actually scaffold out our entire kind of blog interface. Now, if you've ever watched the Ruby on Rails demo from back in the day, this is a kind of similar thing in the sense that you can basically run one command that's going to do everything for you. Now, once we generate our scaffold, we'll be able to go to /posts. And then this is what's going to have our whole kind of blog interface that's going to let us create posts or update posts or delete posts. And it's also going to have a nice little UI to let you do all of those different things you want to do with your blog posts. So first it says loading, and it's checking to see if there's any blog posts in the database. And once it sees that there's no posts there, then you can say, all right, I want to create a post. And we want to call it GraphQL Denver. And once we do that, then you get your post. And then if you want to edit the post, you can edit it. And once we've done that, this is where we start getting into the GraphQL stuff. So we've got our blog post in our database. But what we want to do is we want our front end to be able to query our back end and get that data. And the way we're going to do that is with something called a cell. And a cell is a really nice convention that Redwood has created to make your data fetching declarative. This means that you don't have to worry about whether the data is loading or empty or success. It's going to handle all of that for you and do all that mapping for you. Now, if we go now to our blog posts cell, this is our blog posts cell here. And right now it's giving us an error because we have a schema over here, which is our GraphQL schema definition language. So if you know GraphQL, this should look very familiar. We're defining our GraphQL schema. Our schema has a post, which has an ID, title, body, and created at, and it has a query, which gets you the posts. That posts gives you an array of these post objects, or you can search for a specific post by providing the ID of that post. And then you can also create a post, update a post, or delete a post. So if we look back at our cell here, it's telling us that what we actually want is we want to, did you mean posts? It says cannot query field blog post on type query. Did you mean posts? So this is also showing you here that there's a lot of really nice tooling built in here because things like Prisma are built with TypeScript. So there's like all this typing behind the scenes that kind of lets you get the benefits of TypeScript without necessarily having to write TypeScript, which is really nice. So we're gonna change that to posts, that to posts, that to posts. And then once we do that, we actually want to bring in the blog posts into our home page. So if we go back to our home page here and we import the blog posts cell into our home page, now what we're going to see is we're just going to see the ID. And the reason for that is we have this query up here. So this is a GraphQL query. Right now, our query is asking for the ID of the posts. But if we didn't want the ID, maybe instead we want the title. And then we will get the title on the left, as you can see there. And if we want to actually get everything, then we want to do this. So now we're asking for the ID, the title, the body, and the created at date. So we see all of that. And then the last thing we can do is we can also make our blog post look a little nicer with this here. So this is just creating a little component for us, taking the ID, setting it to the key, taking the title, setting it to an H2, taking the body, setting it to a paragraph, and then setting the date time as well. So now it's actually going to look a little bit more like a blog over here. Cool. So that is kind of like the Redwood example. And as you can see, GraphQL is just baked in. Like GraphQL is what is allowing you to talk to your backend. Right now, our front end is speaking GraphQL to our backend. So you didn't have to do anything to get all of this GraphQL power out of the box. And going back to the beginning of the talk, when I was saying what we really want is we want to just be able to write GraphQL queries on our front end and just do it. So this is why Redwood's really amazing. Now, the next thing I want to show is AWS AppSync. This is going to be a way to actually create a GraphQL API that you can then query. So GraphQL API that is actually hosted somewhere, and that is attached to a database. And we're going to create just a basic little API. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm going to be doing kind of like the very simplest, most basic way that you can do. So I'm just going to build out a blank API from scratch, and we will call it GraphQL Denver. And we are going to first create a schema. So we were talking about the schema definition language in Redwood. This is the same thing, schema definition language. And this is going to first define our schema. So before we even create the schema, first we have to say that we're going to create a schema at all, and that schema is going to have queries and it's going to have mutations. So queries is when you are asking for data from the database, and a mutation is when you want to change data in the database, whether that's creating a post or updating a post or deleting a post. Then we want to be able to do a query, and what that query will be is it will be querying a post, which will be with the ID. So this should look pretty similar to the same schema that we were looking at with Redwood. And then we also have mutations. This only shows put post right now, because once we actually create the database, it's going to give us some more mutations. So we'll hang tight on that for a second. And then this is our actual post type, much like how Redwood had a post type, except this one's even more basic. It doesn't have the created at or the body. It just has the ID and it just has the title. So once you do all of that, you can save your schema. And once you actually save the schema, you can create the resource. So this is the power that you're really getting from AWS AppSync here, is that it's going to do the mapping from your schema to a DynamoDB database. So we're going to use an existing type that we just created, which was our post type. And then we're going to create a table that is just called blog post table. And then here is those extra mutations now. Now we're able to create a post, update a post, or delete a post. And then we also have more queries. Now we're able to get all of the posts if we want, instead of just getting a single post. And that also gives you subscriptions as well, which is a higher level kind of GraphQL concept that you can't necessarily get from using just something like Prisma. And then there's a lot more stuff here. We don't really have time to get into, but that is pretty much all you need to know for now. Once you have actually created the DynamoDB table, then we can start interacting with your database directly by going over to queries. And this is one of the things that makes GraphQL so cool, is that you also get all of this like documentation kind of built in immediately. So if we wanted to create a post, then we can do a mutation. And our mutation that we want to do is we want to create the post. And we want this post to have a title. So you can use this thing over on the left, or you can type it out over here, either way. And we want our title to be GraphQL Denver. And then also you see here how it's giving you an error because we need to actually specify the ID. But what's really cool is that even if you still try and run this query, it's actually going to fix it for you. It's going to give you that ID and say, okay, like we know that this really should error, but we know what you want to do. So we're going to just create the thing for you. So there's a lot of tooling built into this. That's really, really nice. And then if we wanted to do a query to get this post, then we can do that. And we can do it with this ID. And this will just give us the ID back, which isn't very exciting. But if we want to instead to get the title back, we do that and GraphQL Denver. So that's the demo for AWS AppSync. So my idea here is just kind of like give you an idea of what each of these things are and kind of like help you start to wrap your mind around them. What's really cool though is that we actually have a community member who has written this blog post called Calling a GraphQL API in RedwoodJS. This is Daniel Dobrofokin, something like that. And he basically wanted to know, like, how do you get Redwood to talk to AWS AppSync? As far as I know, this is the only person who's ever created a project that actually combines these two things. So for someone who really likes new tech, like figuring out how to like smash new tech pieces together, this is like a cool space to be in because like it's pretty new stuff. And he actually had asked about this on the community forum, and I had done a very similar project with FaunaDB. So I kind of showed him how I set up my FaunaDB backend, and then he kind of ran with that and set up his AppSync in a similar way. So the most important thing you really want to look at here is going to be in the API and inside the, so this is the schema. So he's just setting up a schema with restaurants and a zip code and then a query for the restaurants based on the zip code. So that's pretty simple. And then he is using GraphQL requests library, and he is hitting, so he's creating a request, and then it's an async function that is basically hitting an endpoint, and that endpoint is being provided to you by AWS AppSync. And then you also get an API key along with that. So if you were hosting this on like a Netlify or a Vercel, you would go into the dashboard to set the environment variables and set the API key. And then they're doing a GraphQL request and hitting it. And then the actual request that it's doing is in the services here. And then this is the actual request. You're setting a query and it's asking for it's using the zip code and then getting back the restaurants with that zip code. And that's bringing in the request from that other file that we were just looking at. So this is essentially how you would take a Redwood application and set up an async AWS AppSync API and how to get them combined to actually talk to each other. So yeah, and then this is his repo if you're interested in checking this out, just RedwoodJS AppSync GraphQL demo. And then he's got this great blog post and also this community post about it as well. So yeah, that is the whole presentation.
Sweet. Yeah, that was super awesome. We got some time left for questions. Looks like Ken had one in the chat around, can AWS AppSync be used to query services that you subscribe to in AWS universe, things like S3, RDS, EKS, EC2, along with the links between those objects?
Yeah, that's really the main value prop of AWS AppSync is it's something that can be stitched together with any AWS service you want. It's that middle layer between, so you could do RDS or you could do like DocumentDB. So you could have that map or Dynamo, like I showed Dynamo, so I didn't even do those databases. So it's going to do that mapping between the different databases or the different storage services for you. And you just have to worry about creating that schema. And that's what makes it really, really useful if you're someone who's already like super bought in to the whole AWS ecosystem, because you may already have all these projects. And not about, I'm more interested in getting an overall view of what services I've subscribed to, not about querying the services they're in. Yeah, so you could do subscriptions on it. So I would imagine that's something you could also wire up. That's not something I have dove into too much yet, but that's definitely a feature that it supports, I believe.
Yeah, again, thank you for your presentation. That was awesome. It does support like the async querying for subscriptions, which is really awesome because I've done implementations where we've used GraphQL, specifically AppSync, to get live feedback from other AWS services as we're executing against them. So it's actually really awesome.
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff, it's fairly similar to something you get from like a Firebase, in that both of them were kind of created as like these mobile backends that now kind of like web people are starting to take advantage of. So that kind of like real-time subscription functionality, like that's, I can imagine that that was kind of what one of the original use cases of this was. And like the web stuff is actually kind of us shoehorning ourselves into this kind of like mobile world, that these things, just because they're so useful, you know? Any other questions about AppSync or Redwood? Happy to answer. Yeah, it looks like there's a, in the chat, someone saying that they want to do a demonstration of using Apollo, Postgres, and ORM. And it's like, yeah, that sounds like Redwood, all right. Yeah, because Redwood is using Apollo as the client. You don't really notice it too much. But that's kind of like, that's what's baked in. That's what's doing the GraphQL stuff from your front end to your back end. It's like Apollo is the client, but you actually don't need to necessarily use Apollo. There's some people who have started to use React Query or GraphQL hooks. There's actually all these people who are starting to swap out Redwood's client for a different client. So that's super interesting.
Gotcha.
Namespacing for GraphQL.
I was going to ask about that actually, about the client portion of it, if it like you can hot swap like Apollo with like something else. So that is that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's like really cutting edge. The people who've been doing that, this is just in the last couple of weeks on like the newest Redwood release. So yeah, it's really cool stuff. It's something I'm really interested in. And yeah, basically the thing is just like the bundle size. Like Apollo is really heavy, right. And also some people want different caching defaults. So that's why you have people looking at stuff like Urkel, or just like the whole caching layer is kind of still kind of complicated no matter what you use. And some people, they want a more manual cache. Some people want more, default cache. So it's yeah, there's just like kind of different opinions about what people want their client to even do for them in the first place.
Yep. Gotcha. That is cool that it uses it Apollo by default and is kind of invisible though. That is pretty nice.
Yeah, that was what I really enjoyed about learning it, is that learning Redwood was a really good way to learn GraphQL without having to figure out all of what it takes to set up like a GraphQL server and a GraphQL client and get those to talk to each other. And like that's such a huge startup cost, especially if you're like learning GraphQL as you're learning how to actually integrate the GraphQL tools. So that's one of the things I really like about Redwood and about AppSync as well, is that both of them give you an easy like foot into this whole GraphQL world, which is like so massive and complicated. But if you can like get a foot in and start to like wrap your mind around it, for me, like it just was a really, really nice mental model that I really enjoy working with. And now it's like, I can't go without it. Like I can't work without GraphQL.
Yep, I hear you.
Does Redwood require a schema ahead of time, or can it query a dynamically created schema at runtime? I don't believe that is something we can do right now. It's something that I think we'll probably be interested in looking at doing in the future. Right now, because the CLI allows you to kind of generate your schemas, and your schema is really well integrated with Prisma, the CLI can kind of do most of what you want to do in terms of like actually creating your schema. But in terms of like, so you're asking kind of more about like schema stitching and like that kind of thing? Yeah, because when I think about querying a dynamic schema at runtime, it's like, for me, it's a question of like, what are you trying to do with that schema while at runtime? Data is being generated on the fly on a constant basis.
Yeah, Apollo Federation has like some solutions for that. If you have like multiple like GraphQL servers that you're trying to tie together, I think it's technically like a hosted product, but like they have basically their Federation service like sits between like all your GraphQL servers and the client, and the federated like gateway layer will like continually like fetch doing introspection queries against like the individual servers, and then like collect them all together that way. So that is like kind of their solution for some of that, but there is also like some wonkiness that comes with that, and like the downstream clients where like you don't have like that sort of information like up to date at build time, or like, you know, what you have at build time versus runtime is different, and some things get kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are looking at like GraphQL mesh, and there's like people who are looking at these different like kind of schema stitching options. This type of stuff that's a little bit over my head at this point, but yeah, feel free to hop into the forums or the Discord. I'm sure there's someone in the community who has thought of this and could give you a more sensible answer. Cool. Any other questions for me? And then just so people know, AJC Web Dev on the internet. My Twitter is open if anyone wants to send me messages, or if you're interested in getting involved in Redwood, or just redwoodjs.com. That'll get you to the Discord and the forums and all that. We're very focused on making this an open source project that has, you know, buy-in from the community. I'm someone who just saw Redwood, thought it was really cool, started contributing to it, and eventually got onto the core team. So we're very much open to, you know, getting as many people involved as possible. It doesn't matter what your level is. I came in as like a boot camp student who barely knew how to do anything, and have just, you know, learned a lot by getting to be a part of the community. So yeah, happy to help anyone get onboarded onto any of this stuff.